Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Good to see you. I hope you're having a good week. It's Wednesday as I'm recording this, so happy hump day, whatever that means anymore, as if days of the week or time or anything like that is relevant for most of us. Yeah, I hope everything's going well. I wanted to kind of put something out there for you to consider. And, I'm also kind of building on a few different things I've talked about before, something I wrote about yesterday. But I really kind of want to crowdsource this maybe realization I had the other day, and would love to get your feedback on this because I think I might have figured out, and I realize this isn't necessarily a revelation, maybe, I don't know, you be the judge, but there's a ton of things that are dividing us right now. Some of them are fabricated, some of them are inflamed, some of them are exaggerated, some of them are very genuine, authentic, deeply rooted divisions. But this is one that I think maybe kind of crystallized for me yesterday, that I'm really not sure what to do about it. But anyway, you be the judge. But I'm going to tell you on the front end, I'm going to use kind of an example, but this example isn't the main thing this video is about. It's just the example, okay? But the example that I want to use is, for a long time, I was trying to wrap my head around, the following template that I've heard articulated multiple times, usually from the left. And it's something, the most extreme version is something like this. It's, there are X, whatever the current number is, many people dead because of President Trump's, bungled or failed coronavirus response. And at the beginning, there was a few stories about, how we would maybe turn down some tests from the WHO or a few other things that turned out later to not be accurate. But I was kind of one of those people that was like, well, I know that they didn't handle as good as they could have. And the more I said that, the more I was like, well, what specifically do I mean by that? And like a lesser version that you might have heard from people, is just kind of part of the general disclaimers that people give in terms of, if they're talking about Donald Trump or they want to articulate or explain how they don't like him or something, they'll say, plus this awful coronavirus response and da 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 da. And that, like I said, that's one of those things that the longer I spent even saying it myself and hearing it, the more I would say, okay, well, what would you do differently? What are this thing and that thing? And I was never really able to get good answers that were feasible within our system. But I read an article yesterday by an NBC correspondent named Stephanie Ruhle, who she got coronavirus, and her husband and their kids. And there is something in there that just hit me like a ton of bricks that kind of crystallized the exact issue and really how deeply rooted it is in terms of, kind of where that sentiment might come from. And again, it's not like this isn't one of those disclaimers. I just don't think this is a good enough answer, because some people, what you might say is, well, something about masks or Trump's rhetoric or da 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 da, something like that. Sure, yeah, I agree that his rhetoric isn't very great, but that's not the federal government's coronavirus response. That's not a failed response or a bungled response or anything like that. That's just his rhetoric. So it's got to be something else other than that. Okay. So I read this article by Stephanie Ruhle. I'll link it in the description of the video. And she goes into this thing about how her husband got it and they quarantined. And fortunately, they had two residences because they're wealthy. And so she quarantined in a house. And she also talks about how privileged she was and how privilege is a big problem with coronavirus whenever people get it. She talks about how I was privileged enough to work at a company that let me put my life on hold and put my health first. And I'm like, what business asks you to come to work if you have coronavirus? Like what, I just don't know what place does that. But anyway, I'm not sure that's privilege. Another thing she identified as privilege was, like I said, the two residences, but really the main thing was that she had relatives that lived near her family and community members like neighbors that brought food to her husband and their 3 kids while they were quarantining because she didn't know if she had it yet. She later found out that she did have it. And my thought was, well, it sounds like the bigger privilege is that you were part of a community that took care of itself and you lived close to family members that were willing to look in on you guys. But that's not the point. She later goes on to say, we followed all the guidelines, we did everything right, we do all this stuff, and we still have no idea where we got it. And I mentioned that because it's kind of an admission that, it's still a virus that's highly contagious, that the odds of us containing it, regardless of what she goes on to suggest, she's saying, I did all the things that are the right things, but we still don't know how we got it. But then she kind of gets to the point of her complaint, and her complaint is, cities can do their own thing, and state by state and city by city. And, it's no wonder this thing continues to spread. And, the guidelines are, we follow the guidelines, but they're constantly changing. It's almost like scientists learn new things about new things in a linear fashion. I know, shocking. And there's multiple times when she's getting into the meat of her criticism, if you could call it meat. It's garbage, and she says all of this, we don't have a national plan or a national strategy or the federal government, this and that. And she says, take, for example, South Korea, if you get a positive result, the government puts you up in a hotel and pays for all your food and pays for everything for 2 weeks. And I'm like, okay, so a country the size of Indiana with 16% of the US population, with entirely different health demographics and comorbidities and statistics and a completely different government system. So we need to be more like this thing that's so impossible of a comparison. You can only do that out of ignorance or dishonesty. That's not an answer. But that was what she said. And then here's the sentence that really hit me hard. And this is what I want to talk about. So I'm just using this as an example. She said, here, most of the plan or the strategy boils down to personal responsibility. And she words that like it's an indictment, like it's some kind of bug in the system, when really personal responsibility and liberty is a feature. That's what this country was founded on. It reminded me of a similar kind of illuminating conversation I had with someone on Twitter. Is a good faith conversation. And they were talking about coronavirus response. They were saying similar things to what Stephanie Ruhle was saying. And I said, well, you tell me, what's a country that you think has done this well? And they said, Australia. I said, okay, Australia has, first off, it's an island. But secondly, right now, like in Australia, you can be arrested for a Facebook post. Citizens are prohibited in many places from walking their dog or exercising in their own front yard. They're just on house arrest, even if they're healthy, and they're prohibited from doing that. Like only one person can go to this grocery store like once a day and leave the house and all this other stuff. There is an Australian airline that has just said that once the vaccine's rolled out for intra-state travel in Australia, that you'll have to have proof of a vaccine if you want to fly with them. And so I said that they don't have the Constitution we have. First off, you shouldn't want that anyway. Like you shouldn't want the government to be able to keep you from walking your dog or letting your dog out in the yard and sitting on the front porch. That shouldn't be something that could be made illegal. And they said, well, the federal government could if they wanted to. And we kind of went back and forth. But then finally, I said, look, that's the system that we have. That's federalism. They're like, well, it's only that, because the federal government didn't do anything. It's the state by state because the federal government's response was to do nothing. And so it had to be that. And the point I made was, I said, no, that's the system. That's how it works. You might not like that. That might not go with your general philosophy of governance, but that is how this system works. The different states can do different things. They can run their own experiments, and then people can look and say that state's doing well, that state's not. That's why we have different, tax law in different states that make it appealing or incentivizing for companies to go there or to not be there, for example. And And his point was the same as Ruhel's. It's like, well, that the federal government should be able to da-da-da thing. And again, he was identifying what, as a bug, something that's a feature, that this idea of personal responsibility and individual rights and liberty to do that, which is kind of the root of our federalist system, that people, it's localism, that everything happens, at the locus of the family and the city and the county and the state, and then the region and then the national federal government. But I realized that that's what seems to be one of the main divides right now in people as they conceptualize governance, as they conceptualize solutions or anything like that. It seems like we're kind of divided among those who are sitting screaming for someone to do something, and those who realize that the most effective something is going to come first from themselves, then from those around them, and so on and so forth. And that's, I'm not saying that there aren't obviously times when, you need the government to do something. Okay. That's not what I'm talking about. Obviously, like for example, a local police force is good. You call the police. That is the same as saying, I want the government to do something, because I'm going to call the police force and I want them to show up if there's someone breaking into my house, for example. But at the same time, I'm going to be much more equipped to deal with that person in a timely manner if I'm an armed and trained citizen than that police officer is. And the police officer is going to handle it in a more rapid and maybe informed way due to the situation than like if say a federal marshal or a state, trooper or something showed up from an entirely different place, way afterwards. That's my point. And that there is this right now, there's this drive for people to have the perception, even it's not even the reality of that the something is effective, or that the something is grounded in science, or that it's tangible, or in terms of the efficacy, or that it's adaptive or anything like that. They just want the feeling of the something. I was looking at Joe Biden released his coronavirus response thing yesterday, and the media is like fawning over it, that's to be expected. But I was reading it, and it's literally, here's what it is. I'm not kidding. You can fact check me. It's basically Trump's vaccine plan, and just building on that and letting that play out, the plan that's already in place. It's Trump's plan for schools reopening, just taking that and letting that play out in concert with the vaccine stuff. And then saying that at places where he would have the jurisdiction, because again, federalism, that he would make masks mandatory for 100 days. And so that's federal buildings, and that's planes and buses. But these are all places that already require masks. So his plan is to do all the things that Trump was already doing, and then also to say, I'm going to require masks in these places that had already independently established a mask requirement. Like, go to any airport. We flew very recently over Thanksgiving. The signs are like, you can't get on the plane. You can't be anywhere around there without the mask on. I assume buses are the same way. Could be wrong. They're talking about, federal highways, interstate travel. I could be wrong, but I suspect buses are the same way. But it was lauded because it's like, finally someone's going to do something. And that something was nothing. It's nothing, like, effectively, right? It's like, well, that all these things were already happening. They had just, first off, you didn't get honest coverage of the school stuff or the vaccine stuff, but the mask thing was already happening. But it just makes people feel better that someone's doing something. My own governor, I wrote about this yesterday on my locals, how I've, up until this point, I'd always been quite proud of the fact that I didn't know my governor's name. And, to me, that was again, a feature of my philosophy of governance, where it's, if I don't know their name, it's because they're not doing anything to screw with my life. Like, it's a good thing. I want them to be governing in a way that they remain anonymous until, they have to be not anonymous. Like if a tornado hit or something like that, and he declared, some kind of emergency or whatever, or showed up to go and survey the damage or whatever. But my own governor in a very red state issued these new COVID lockdown guidelines, where the number of people that could gather indoors was at 25. Now it's 10. Businesses can only operate from 5 in the morning until 10 o'clock at night. So they have to close and stop serving after 10. Within a few days of that order being issued, there was one bar and restaurant that said, we're gonna close. We have to close now because that's when we do most of our business. There's a taxi company in town where I live that said, we're gonna raise our prices. Hopefully it works, but we do 80% of our business after 10. But we'll see. And then there's another place that said, we're gonna scale back and we'll see. But we might also have to close. There is a gym that was opened that they now can only allow 10 people in at a time. And the woman's trying to figure out who opened it is trying to figure out how to keep that business afloat. It's not like coronavirus is nocturnal. Like after 10, then, that's when it's scary. Before 10, 9:58, you're good. 10:01, that's when it's going to get you. But my point is that even in a state that's very red and with a Republican governor, there's still this immense pressure to make it seem like you're doing something. Like people have this, I think, unconscious notion that unless the government is doing something, then they're screwing up. That basically the only positive mode for a government is doing something, is action, as opposed to not doing something. And, that's, again, like I said, okay in selective circumstances, but that can't be your default. And what I'm seeing now is a conflation between, I think, safety and liberty. And of course, those are connected. Like you can't exercise your freedom and liberty in a place where you're not safe. So I understand. But, I think about that quote that Benjamin Franklin, uttered, 230, 240 years ago, where he said, they that would give up essential liberty for a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. And he identified this pathology in people who, when push comes to shove would say, just take my freedoms. I just want to be comfortable and safe. And it's a perception of safety, or, Franklin identified rightly, I think, a temporary, it might be real, but it's temporary, or it might just be a perception of it, but that they would rather have that than have the liberty to create their own safety, or at least try. And I think that idea that, again, that going back to Ruhle saying, here it's just about personal responsibility, that's what this boils down to, where you see all these calls for government policy and you look and you go, how could that be something that someone wants? Like, why would a person want, again, going back to Australia, or, even just thinking like when there was, the news cycle goes, and has these different trends. And when the guns was the main thing after Christchurch in New Zealand, New Zealand's prime minister, I think prime minister is what they're called. Yeah. Jacinda Ardern just basically passed the sweeping gun legislation that banned a bunch of these weapons. And people in the US were celebrating it, that they could just do that, that there was no protection, that whatever rights you have or don't have are just contingent on the whims of the government. And the same, I would go to Australia, where people are saying, yeah, we need to be like Australia, where you can be arrested for walking your dog in your own yard. And that there is just way too many people that see our freedom as a bug and not as a feature. That liberty and that personal responsibility that Ruhle was lamenting, that's the foundation of America. That's the Pilgrims. That's the Gold Rush. That's Lewis and Clark. That's, the Oregon Trail, and so on and so forth. That's how we were formed, was by people striking out on their own. And I worry, to the point that I would love your feedback on. Well, I'll take your feedback on any of this, but I worry that the concept of liberty and freedom is something that people are okay gambling with because they don't see the value in it. James Darien, who I did a conversation with a couple weeks ago, made a video this last summer where he talked about the elasticity and the purchasing power of liberty. I thought it was really interesting. And it went quite nicely with the way that I use prospect theory as another economic principle for measuring different political choices and societal trends and stuff. But prospect theory is this thing that Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky came up with, these two economists from Israel, I believe. And what they said was, look, people used to think that the consumer is rational, that they make purchasing decisions based on like objective, grounded metrics. But it's actually subjective, and it's relative to their concept of absolute zero, and it's relative to where the risk or the purchase or the gain or anything is from absolute zero. So a couple examples, I promise this relates. One thing they say is, okay, let's say you're deciding between two toasters. One of them is $15, and there's one that's, you can tell is maybe a little better, but it's $30. You're probably going to get the $15 one, right? And he said, but well, what about if you're buying a TV and one's $1,015 and there's one that's a little better, but it's $1,030. Like, you're not going to, it's the same difference. It's a $15 difference, but it's so far removed from absolute zero, $0, that $15 difference is probably not going to make much of a difference for you. And you're probably going to buy the $1,030 one, and the same on the other end, where it's, if you find $20 or you win $20, that feels pretty good. The difference between winning $20 and winning $0 is a big difference. But the difference between winning $1,000 and $1,020 doesn't feel that different, even though it's the same real difference, which is $20. The addition of that 1,000 that separates it from zero makes it where it doesn't feel the same. Like, you're probably going to feel the same winning 1,000 as you would winning 1,020, whereas it feels very different to win 0 and 20. See what I'm saying? So, but one of the things they talk about with prospect theory, with the relative terms, is that people are risk averse and risk seeking based on those same relative inputs and outputs. So if people perceive that they don't have very much to lose, they're very risk seeking, because they're like, what's the point? You hear about nothing left to lose, right? Whatever. What's that old song? Dreaming's just another word for nothing left to lose. I don't know, classic rock. Anyway, Bobby McGee, Me and Bobby McGee is the name of it. Anyway, doesn't matter. But if you feel like you do have a lot to lose, you're going to be very risk averse. You're going to stay away from risk. And to where James talked about the purchasing power of liberty, I would argue that there's a lot of things that people don't, I've used prospect theory to conceptualize different rights and just like the West generally. But I think with liberty, people think that that it doesn't get them much, that it's not very valuable, that they don't have a lot to lose by losing liberty, or that personal responsibility thing. And so they're totally willing to gamble with it. They're like, whatever, take all of that. I would rather have this temporary safety thing. And I think there's some good reasons for that. I was thinking about how connected you were to your own individual liberty and actions and freedom maybe 100 years ago compared to now. And like, basically how much you made a connection between that and your success, or just your ability to succeed in the system generally 100 years ago compared to now. So I was thinking about like now, so you take someone who, let's say you're in like a low, so I'll do both, low socioeconomic prospects, poor area, something like that, poor family. For example, the town that I grew up in had a pork processing plant, and more people graduated from high school, went to work at the processing plant than went to college. My dad would always say that. Now, he talked about it pejoratively. I would argue that that's not all bad, because there are people I know who went there and worked right out of high school and have been there at this point 15 years. And so they've worked up to where they're making a nice salary, way more than I make, and I have a master's degree. But either way, you kind of are following a script. You stay in the same area. You might go work at the gas station and work at a gas station or at a restaurant or something for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, whatever. And you're just kind of in that. And then there's other people who maybe their parents were more affluent and they bought their car in high school and they paid for all this stuff, and they're going to help them out with college. So they were able to wield some kind of leverage on what college they went to. And the kid goes to the approved college, and since the parents are helping pay for it, they're like, you're going to get a degree in something that is going to be, financially viable. So they pick an approved degree track, and then they get the internship and the job based on their peers and their professors and their parents and the prospects. And then they go and work at the nice firm, and they're making money, and their parents can now brag about how good their kid's doing. And the kid moves into an apartment where it's like, I've got a nice loft or whatever. And they don't have a mortgage. They just pay the monthly rent. Their landlord takes care of everything. They don't have to fix anything themselves. They don't have to do anything themselves. They order out every day. All that's taken care of for them. They are with a person or are with a series of people that a dating app connected them to. So there's no risk or anything there. And that's their new American dream. And, I would ask you, where in that sequence is risk or liberty or personal responsibility or adventure? Where is that? Where can a person, they're like, show me on the map where my own freedom and liberty is what led me to being successful. Now, I would say the freedom and liberty and risk taking and adventure seeking of other people is what established the ability to do that. Like their parents' success, or the person who built that loft that they live in that takes care of all that, or, or whatever, the system we have, it's a problem of progress where a person can do that. And, they're like, I didn't really have to take a lot of risk. I'm not saying that we need to go back to a time when everything is dangerous and anything like that. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just pointing out what I think is a natural just observation that I have, that people are going to gamble with liberty and freedom if they don't tangibly see how liberty and freedom are necessary for their own personal success. Now, again, it is because the liberty and freedom of others who are willing to lean into that and take risks is what built the system that allowed them to do that. But I'm just saying they don't see that, whereas compared to, let's say, 100 years ago, where you would say, my ability to go and do this thing, to choose this path, to go strike it out on my own, or, think about even, why, here's one, man. Yeah, I'll say it. It just popped into my head. I'm like, man, if I don't flesh this out right, it's going to sound really bad, but it's like, why is slavery a big deal? Why was there a difference between people that were slaves, in the pre-Emancipation Proclamation era, and those who weren't? There were people that could go and get their 40 acres and a mule and go out and strike it on their own. If they make it, great. If not, otherwise. And there are slaves who did not have the freedom to do that. Like abolitionists saw, you need freedom, you need liberty. Like, it's not like, first off, that's basic human decency and humanity is you don't enslave other humans. Like, that's evil and immoral. But there's a practical level where it's, these people can't flourish if they're not allowed to chase their own dreams and chase their own freedom and to do what they want to do, to pursue the American dream. That was Frederick Douglass's indictment of Independence Day. It's like, this isn't anything for us. We don't get to go and pursue happiness. So that's my point, is that people used to see a connection between liberty and the success of themselves, the success of their family, the success of the system. Whereas I think that's lost. And that's how you get someone like Stephanie Rell saying, well, here it's just about personal responsibility. Can you believe that? Like, that hits me like someone saying, can you believe you can't be arrested in the US for a Facebook post, like criticizing the government? Can you believe that? Like, can you believe we have freedom of speech? Like, how barbaric. That's how that lands on me personally. But that's a really intractable problem. Again, to my point earlier, that's how you get to people like, maybe there's something where there's an atrophy of the liberty muscle or the freedom muscle, where you get people that's just their default is someone going to do something, or so do something, make me feel comfortable. And those who in the situation are those who do something. We're like, yeah, why would I sit around here waiting for someone to do something? Like, I've been making choices my whole life. And so I'm just going to keep making choices. And again, there's obviously times that you need the federal government to do something, but most times when the federal government just is doing something to make it seem like they did something, very rarely is that going to be effective. Very rarely are expansions of government useful. Are they good for taxpayer dollars or anything like that? Even though they might create a certain sense of, hollow, fake security or temporary safety for some people. And so that's what I want to put in front of you is like, what do we do about that? Like, how do we instantiate the importance of liberty and of freedom? Is it too late for that? How do we get people to see, consequences of liberty and freedom? Again, this is a different kind of thing, but it's connected, is that, it seems like liberty and freedom and personal responsibility are maybe only, they're more noticeable in places where there's a direct observable connection between action and consequence. And right now we are seeing a huge erosion of that connection, or at least the observable connection, right? So we have bad governance that keeps getting reelected. Someone like Eric Garcetti or Gavin Newsom or Kate Brown or Ted Wheeler or whatever, Keisha Lance Bottoms, Lori Lightfoot, Andrew Cuomo, take your pick. They can govern really badly and there's no consequences. We can treat each other however we want to treat each other. We can say horrible things to people online, and quite often, most times, there's no consequences. So people are exercising freedom in a lot of ways where there's no consequences, and they're seeing benefit in areas where it might not be a result of their freedom, but it's a result of the freedom of others exercising their freedom. And so I don't know, maybe that's part of the disconnect, but there has to be a way to maybe for people to see that again, to see that this isn't, it's not a bug. It's not a bug. It's what has created the most prosperous, amazing, broken, tenacious, influential empire the world has yet seen. That's America. There's a reason people come here. And I think very rarely is it people coming here because they don't want freedom. Usually they're leaving a place where they had less freedom, where they couldn't, pursue their dreams and their happiness, or they said, I want to be the one to do something. I've been in a place where the government is always the one who does something. It doesn't work out. I promise. I want to move somewhere where I can do something and I can be the author of my own destiny. And I can be the one who creates that safety instead of, trading my liberty in for the government to give me temporary safety. So yeah, as if we need one more thing to divide people, one more way to divide folks. I think that one way you can do it is those who scream, somebody do something, and those who just do something and who understand the value of their liberty, and those who are willing to gamble with it because they'd rather have the temporary safety. So yeah, that's one more thing that I feel a little overwhelmed by, but you can give me your thoughts on that. Leave them in the comments. And, if you have, what do you think we do about that? Well, one, do you think I'm right? Is that sane, reasonable assessment? And two, if so, what do we do about that? Is there a way to get people to see that? I think about in WALL-E, everyone's in their little hover chairs and they're riding around and they have these screens in front of them and everything is filtered through that screen. WALL-E, I think, is one of the most prescient, prophetic movies ever. Everything's filtered through this screen, and there's this part where there's these people talking to each other on the screen, and something happens where something disrupts the screen, and they kind of bump into each other, and they realize they're right next to each other, and they look and they actually talk to each other, and they kind of wake up from that, oh, I can see, oh, I can look around and do all these things. So I know that there's a way for people to wake up to this stuff. I just don't think I know what it is right now. My gut tells me people just have to fail. People have to experience failure. People have to, one of the sayings I heard most growing up was, there are three kinds of people in the world: those who can be told, and that's enough; those who won't listen if you tell them, but if they see it, they'll believe it, and that's enough; and then the rest just have to piss on the electric fence themselves. And I think there's something to be said about that. And I think increasingly we're seeing a divide between those who kind of get it and those who just haven't quite spent enough time pissing on the electric fence, maybe. I don't know. So that's it. I'll be releasing a conversation I had with Jeremy Bentham, I think probably early next week, something like that. And I've got a few other conversations lined up in the works. A few, if they happen, man, I'm really excited. But there's other things I'm working on that I'm excited about. Again, like I said in my last video, we have to keep moving forward. Even though everything I just said here, I know it's depressing, and maybe again, I hope I'm wrong, please tell me if I am, but it can be overwhelming. But again, like I said before, what choice do we have? We have to keep moving forward. We have to figure these things out and tackle them, because this is all we got. This is all we got. So it's, to again quote Morgan Freeman in Seven, Ernest Hemingway once said, "The world is a fine place and worth fighting for." I agree with the second part. And I agree with the second part. I think it's worth fighting for. So that's it. This kind of thing you're into, please like, share, and subscribe. Follow me on Twitter. It's at My Mundane Mind. Go to my locals community, which is amazing. The people there are super great. You guys are awesome. That's at returntoreason.locals.com, YouTube Return to Reason, Medium and ThinkSpot, Return to Reason, and all the other places. The thing. So that's it, and I will check you next time. Peace.